So tonight we are talking about exposing online mass manipulation. Why we chose this topic: we're facing one of the biggest challenges today, and we're focusing tonight's talk on disinformation. Tonight's speakers are the authors of the Qatar Plot, a sophisticated disinformation campaign that had serious real-world consequences, and Sohan and Marc were on hand to unearth this campaign. We're delighted to welcome Sohan Dsouza and Dr. Marc Owen-Jones as our guest speakers tonight. Sohan Dsouza is a computational social scientist specializing in disinformation, political polarization, and online mass misinformation. He has experience in with crowdsourcing and AI ethics, having worked with MIT Media Labs, and has been featured in outlets such as the New York Times and the BBC. Dr. Marc Owen-Jones is an associate professor at Northwestern University in Qatar. He's an expert on digital authoritarianism and disinformation. He frequently appears in international media such as Al Jazeera and The Guardian. Together, they've done some incredible work in uncovering this campaign, and we're proud to mention that not only are they our guest speakers, but Sohan is also a member with us here at Central London Humanists. So with that, I'd like to hand over to our speakers for this evening. I believe, Sohan, you'll be speaking first. Over to you.
Thank you, James. Thank you all. Thank you to the Central London Humanists for the opportunity to present. And I'd like to start by talking to thank Professor Marc Owen-Jones for collaborating with me on this and getting us to this point. To start off with, around mid-February, early February, I began noticing some dodgy ads on Facebook. Having been in open source intelligence for quite a while, I have sort of developed a sense for something that looks a bit sketchy, usually like organizations or organizations that seem to be trying to fund or try to present some kind of messaging, but don't really have very much to say about themselves, anything traceable. So I began looking into these and archiving some of these. I reached out to Marc as well around this point, and we discovered many more. This one, as you can see, was from a different page, but it had the same content. A lot of this stuff began raising our suspicions, and by the end of it, nearly 5 months later, we had discovered an operation that had spun almost 7 months, been going on since about November. Involving over 25 branded Facebook pages plus sponsoring pages, pages as infrastructure. Meta in their August, we published our report in July, but Meta in August said that they found about 65 pages in their adversarial threat report, and plus we could not find out how many accounts there were because that layer of transparency is not available to us. But they said it was 112 accounts. Of course, it doesn't necessarily mean they got all the other, I guess, the tertiary level pages as well. They also said it was about 49 Instagram accounts were involved. Instagram is famously even far less transparent than Facebook. It's a bit ironic that we have to go into Facebook. It's like you can only see how much mess is there when the lights are working. So it's a bit paradoxical that platforms that have the most transparency are also, I guess, you can criticize them the most because you can actually see how much, how far they've fallen short. We also found quite a bit of, despite Twitter X's lack of transparency, we're able to find about 11 pages, 11 accounts plus 7 suspected booster accounts running ads on their behalf, plus a large network of suspected booster bots doing inauthentic engagement. 9 Wikimedia accounts, which were attacking about 25 Wikipedia pages across different languages, mainly English, but also Arabic and Farsi, as well as 24 Wikidata pages, mainly to do with the Qatar royal family, but also some about Qatar's foreign relations in general. And yeah, 5 websites, there were 5 hosted websites, 4 YouTube channels, 3 Telegram channels, 1 TikTok account, and a partridge in a pear tree. No, not the last one. So yeah, starting out like around November-ish through January, it was they might have been testing the waters. We're not quite sure, but they were posting relatively more. There was a smaller presence, first of all, and it was mostly oriented towards In the French-aimed ones, Lebanese-aimed ones, it was mostly about secularism, a bit relevant. And there was some stuff about, it was starting to get into the whole thing about the hostages, the Israeli hostages taken by Hamas, and also pacifism in Lebanon, like preaching pacifism to the Lebanese, bringing up memories of the war and everything, the earlier war. And then around mid-February, it really began leaning in with more like aggressively anti-Qatar content, talking about Qatar as a terrorist harbor, as a security threat, especially its ownership of properties in Europe and its connections with American universities. It began. There was a Change.org petition, which was signed by John Anderson, which is about as generic as a pretty generic name, I guess, and signed as Citizens of Humans' Lives, elsewhere branded as Citizens for Human Lives, completely fake NGO either way. And yeah, aggressive stuff about like, putting babies in Qatar Airways carriages and things like that. Pretty aggressive stuff as well, almost apocalyptic stuff about Lebanon, avoiding to stay out of any conflict. And also leaning into some strangely biblical, like quoting the Bible and talking about like God's mission. There was some interesting links with like evangelical pro-Israel people, which may explain that, but we're not entirely certain. In any case, yeah, here you can see another weird error, like to fulfills God's will. These and other errors give us an impression that someone is involved here is not quite fluent in their grammar and spelling. And also they managed to get this into the real world with an ad, actually two ads at New York City's Times Square, which is not cheap at all, as well as apparently sending people to DC and to Paris to demonstrations to hold up their their tamer, the tamer wings of their campaign, of their operation. It's in your hands and you have the power, mainly focused on the hostages, but also at CPAC, which is the the American Conservative Political Action Conference, calling for sanctions on Qatar as part of the Shame on Qatar campaign. That was the first wave. The second wave around like in April, May, June, it began going really all in. Like I don't know if they're quite emboldened by their not having been discovered exactly who they are until that point. But at this point, they really began leaning in with Qatar as a kraken, an AI-generated kraken, no less, attacking the Europe. A lot of very apocalyptic catastrophism stuff about immigration in Europe, showing like Europe on fire thanks to immigrants, European monuments being destroyed. Although sometimes it was just people being Muslim in Europe that was framed in a very like they're taking over and setting up Sharia and everything. Also very aggressive stuff about the Qatar royal family, a fake Eurovision parody video that they published and promoted aggressively. Another fake NGO, this one more about extremism, purported extremism, actually went to some climate. Anyway, the URL was fake, and taking a lot of content from the very far right ecosystem, mainly on Twitter, and publishing this through X and Telegram, stuff about asylum seekers and using far right buzzwords and far right euphemisms like cultural enricher and such, basically immigrant crime porn. So yeah, that was the second phase of it. That was very aggressive and very xenophobic, very anti-Muslim. Its reach, we estimate, was about 6.5 million in the UK, about 21 million in France, and about 3.5 million in the US. Plus, they targeted, as mentioned earlier, Lebanon. There was some targeting in the Philippines, but more on that later. That seems to be more about some inauthentic validation of their ads. and some targeting of other countries in Europe, Germany, Croatia, yeah, all over Belgium, especially not shown over here. We may have to update this actually because when Facebook published their adversarial threat report, we had originally estimated a much smaller reach because of the lack of transparency or the shortfall in transparency. We estimated it might be about 250,000. That was our max conservative estimate. It turns out it was per meta, it's about 1.2 million. That's 1.2 million US dollars. That's a lot of money, and someone was somehow able to escape being identified while pushing this money through, as you can see later, through some inauthentic channels. We're able to note, using at least what transparency was available on Facebook, we're able to find the underlying infrastructure of sponsoring pages that connect all these public-facing branding pages like Shame on Qatar and Europe First and all these catharsis and all of that. They have these network of kind of burner throwaway pages, many of them hacked, used to sponsor ads on these pages. Thereby, if the sponsoring pages get destroyed, that's no biggie for them, I guess. These were run through, at least on Facebook, through a Vietnamese proxy who was very puzzlingly advertising their services on Facebook, that they're able to game the Facebook algorithm and sell Facebook assets. And we can see like almost wherever the currency was visible on Facebook, we're able to see it was almost all in Vietnamese currency, in the Vietnamese dong. The use of hacked assets was pretty extensive. Unfortunately for this West African wannabe hip hop artist, this small regional Indian political candidate, this Hungarian pizzeria. Sad for them, but their assets were taken over and used for the to sponsor pages in this campaign. And there were also a lot of just inauthentic pages just created from whole cloth, pretty much. You can see over these here, probably created using some kind of script, all sharing the same name. Unfortunately, because of the lack of transparency or the shortfall in transparency, we weren't able to identify exactly which one, except in a few cases where the name was really like unique or didn't have any common terms in it. There was also some use of similar like pages created from like a boilerplate kind of like a common template with just like bare bones content, often Vietnamese as well. Giving unauthentic engagement, like you giving laugh reacts to some of the ads to presumably boost them, and also there was some use of like ads aimed at, as I mentioned earlier, the Philippines, to gain some initial engagement for the pages and for the content, like possibly to validate that the page is genuine about their content. So it post something like a rose or something like that, and a bunch of people in the Philippines would like that. And then I guess that would cause the page to evade scrutiny. I'm not entirely sure, but this was some tactic that they used. Unfortunately, we weren't able to identify the full scope of this network because sometimes the whatever transparency information was there would just disappear when the page or the ad was taken down. Which is especially when you need to see, that what the transparency information is and investigate further. But anyway, X didn't escape here. Despite X's lack of transparency, we were able to find pages that were running ads on behalf of campaigns, separate from the, again, like in parallel with Facebook, separate from the public branding pages. Many of these were also using inauthentic boosting networks, like the ones that just basically are paid somehow to boost other pages. For example, you can see on the right of here. Sorry, I don't have a cursor, but like that list on the right, you can see there's just like Twitter accounts that do nothing but boost other content on other accounts. We found some use of inauthentic accounts with AI generated images. You can see this Lisa Padil's to the trained eye. You can see that it's an AI generated image. There were some others that also AI generated, like this Derek Brown person with a middle with a middle incisor, like 3 incisors, things like that, and running ads on behalf, including this cheap fake of Sheikh Moza of Qatar, and doing things like what an amazing video, basically more inauthentic engagement. We're also able to identify a lot of shared content. In the initial stages, in the 0th and the first wave, they were mainly keeping content separate, but they got either careless or they didn't really care at all. Later, especially in the second wave, in the May-June wave, when they began actually taking content with the watermarks still on them and putting them on different campaigns with watermarks of other campaigns, not lifting, but like sharing content wholesale, also using shared handles and things like that. So that enabled us to get a further window into the connections among different campaigns and across platforms and across campaigns. Again, we got lucky in many cases, but I wish we didn't have to depend on so much on luck. There was also a lot of stuff on Wikimedia. They used some pretty nifty tactics, like using Wikimedia accounts, multiple Wikimedia accounts, some of which appear to have been hacked. And they would do things like they would have multiple accounts do successive vandal edits, and then only the last one would be reverted, so that it would look like all the vandal edits were reverted. Basically a distraction tactic. Another one was using something similar, like they would someone would make a kind of a vandal-like edit, and then someone else would come and revert it, but they would sneak into the reversion, into the revert edit, their own content. Like in this case, the one of the URLs of one of the campaigns. So yeah, I mean, this is something for, I guess, Wikimedia to look into. There was quite a bit of AI generated content. It doesn't seem to have been intended to be realistic. It was mostly just propagandistic images, like this guy with a turban and a weirdly pumpkin looking dynamite stack, I think. And there was also, video narration was used in that one case I mentioned. One cheap fake, we're overlaying a fake soundtrack over a Sheikh Moza speech. And really, if I find these people, I just want to find them actually to tell them that, as you can see on the lower right, lower left image, Muslims all, especially in places far from Mecca as London, Muslims all pray in the same direction. Like they don't, they don't pray in a semicircle facing out. Anyway, sorry with the pedantry. There was a lot of stuff with aimed at the UK, as I mentioned about. We estimated super conservatively that may have to be expanded about 6.5 million people in the months leading up to the election, definitely within an election year. And I mean, of course, we didn't know at the time, but it would have been in the time also leading up to the Southport riots, Southport spin-off riots. As you can see, this kind of imagery that is being fed to people in the UK, artificially boosted, and this is just on Facebook, like the Big Ben bowing, the Big Ben being destroyed, more than 14,000 mosques in Europe, 60 million Muslims, like oh my goodness, and very, very tenuously, and that's being very charitable, linking it to Qatar, basically throwing Muslims under the bus to get at Qatar. We could see from the analysis of comments on a sample of these aimed at the UK ads, there was a broad preponderance of anti-Muslim bigotry, Islamophobic views in the comments that were engaging with these. So yeah, they were whipping up this fervor that may have played some role in perhaps some of the voting patterns seen in the election, plus the later we could see the riots as well. So the lessons from this are, the platforms need to take into account what we've written in our report that you can see on the website, whose URL I'll mention later, and put in the chat as well. And you may have seen, sorry, it was in the event description as well. yeah, we have a list of recommendations and pointing out gaps that platforms need to close with being able to detect coordinated and authentic behavior. I'm sure, especially with AI, they could find some patterns like boilerplate pages sharing the same template, all converging on one post by some new page that's posting an ad, for example. So yeah, looking at closing these gaps, platform transparency, helping OSINT, like open source intelligence researchers like us, and other open source intelligence researchers, helping also people just generally, just netizens in general, also be able to like look into, hey, why did the name of this page suddenly change? The transparency really helps everyone. And as I mentioned, there were cases of information, not just gaps in information, not just gaps in transparency in information, but information actually disappearing from transparency. When a page was taken down, it would no longer show up on CrowdTangle, RIP CrowdTangle. When an ad was removed, its sponsorship information disappeared. So things like that needs to be fixed. We need some legal reform to recognize coordinated and authentic behavior as a kind of fraud, because that's exactly what it is. And to enforce, I mean, it may be hard to enforce in Vietnam, but it'd be good if they did. But also, like internationally, make sure that coordinated and authentic behavior is dealt with very firmly and addressed as an actual problem for law enforcement to look into. Media literacy in schools, in our education system, and the whatever literacy channels there are. It'd be good for netizens also to, like people online, to be vigilant, to know that they're especially in this year, and especially in this age of AI supercharged disinformation and misinformation, to be aware that they're being targeted for manipulation, and specific communities as well. Like this year, as we've seen in 2016 elections, and in 2020 as well. For example, specific communities like African Americans were targeted in the US in 2016, and this year, African Americans and various minority groups, plus also hobbyist communities, like interest communities, like gamers, are being targeted for plying with disinformation and being pulled further into some political path, often framing it as political homelessness and such. So as humanists, I think especially we should be vigilant, because there are some who will start out with something like um, broad milquetoast messages like no one could disagree. Yes, government should treat all religions equally, and there should be secularism and there should be humanism and so on. But then we should be vigilant that they might start pulling us down the path that will take us to more and more extreme propaganda and extreme views. Not saying don't criticize any religion or its tenets or practices, don't criticize any regime or faction or party or government, but just be aware of these manipulation techniques, and yeah, be vigilant for these. So this is the URL again. It's in the event description, and over to Marc to talk more about what led to the riots and the misinformation during the riots.
Thank you, Sohan. It was a pleasure working with you. It's great to be here. My first time in the Central London Humanists. Hopefully not the last. So my name is Marc Jones, and I'm a professor of media analytics, and I spend my time doing partly what Sohan's just described, investigating disinformation and the manipulation of our information space. I like to think of information as a diet, right? So we have a thought diet, and we are what we consume, we are what we eat, and we are the information that we process. And so much of what I do is analyzing how our diet is being influenced or controlled or manipulated, I wouldn't say controlled necessarily, through social networks. And the Southport, and I'm just going to go through some of the X activity, in particular around the Southport riots and the Southport stabbings, because I think it's a really interesting example of how social media, coupled with suspicious actors, suspicious accounts, much like the ones Sohan mentioned, seem to play an important role in spreading disinformation. So I'm just going to walk you through a few graphs and sort of explain that. Sort of a bit of data journalism, and this is what I was sort of doing a lot during the Southport riots, partly because I was interested, partly because it was the summer holiday, and I actually had time to do some work, which is a nice change. I mean, I'm always working, but you know, when you're not teaching. So what you can see before you is a graph of the 48 hours in the immediate aftermath of the Southport tragedy. It's 48 hours, and on the left-hand side, you can see the impression count. Now, the impression count is how many people view a particular tweet, and each of the red blobs is a particular tweet from a particular account. So if you, for example, look in the top left, you will see an account that has about 4 million impressions, well, almost 4 million impressions by an account called Europe Invasion, and so on. And there's various other accounts here. Some of them you might recognize. There's Cobra Tate, Andrew Tate, the well-known self-described misogynist. Tommy Robinson, another, I think he describes himself as an anti-Islam activist. Darren Grimes, a presenter for GB News. So all these are people who tweeted in the aftermath of the Southport stabbings, within 2 hours of it happening, that the attacker was either a Muslim or an immigrant, right? So disinformation. So this was false speculation in the immediate aftermath of the Southport stabbings, and this false speculation obtained millions and millions of views. And what's particularly interesting is that whilst there's lots of people engaged in this false speculation, Europe Invasion, which is the account that we're sort of quite interested in because it featured, or at least Sohan and I think it featured in the campaign that we talked about, was one of the first accounts to spread this false information and one of the most highly engaged accounts. And I just want to sort of take a little segue here as well. There's a few interesting stories here. Some of the speculation wasn't just that the attacker was Muslim or an immigrant. Some of it created a backstory. So one particularly well-known example of the speculation in the aftermath of this was people gave him a name, Ali al-Shakati. The killer wasn't called Ali al-Shakati. And this name also went viral, and there was a number of accounts. On the left here, you can see a woman called Bernie Spofford, who was actually quite well known during the COVID-19 for spreading anti-vax information. She was arrested by the Cheshire police, and actually today it was just announced that she will not be charged. And then a few hours later, a news account called Channel 3 Now News, which looked like a news account, which was actually a content farm running partly out of Pakistan. The owner was actually arrested in Pakistan too for spreading information that contributed to riots. He claimed that he copied the information of a British account, which is probably Bernie Spofford. He was arrested and subsequently released. So it was just interesting to mention that there was all sorts of little nuances going on within this, contributing to this narrative, that the false narrative that the attacker was Muslim. And here you can see Channel 3 Now's news account. On the right, you can see Bernie Spofford's tweet making up the name Ali al-Shakati. Again, just giving you an insight into the disinformation ecosystem. But what I really wanted to talk about is this account, Europe Invasion, because Sohan and I saw some engagement, or a fair bit of engagement, with this account and the campaign that we'd worked on. Now, there's a number of interesting things here. So Europe Invasion, for one, is a hijacked account. What does that mean? Well, that means that someone purchased or stole or hacked another account and then deleted all the old tweets and then turned it into this Europe Invasion account. As you can see on the right here, the old Twitter name for this account was called Makena Crypto. It was probably a crypto account. What this usually means, if someone is hacking or taking over another account and repurposing it, that there probably is some element of an influence operation, because that's not normally someone operating, just with benevolent intentions does. So that was also very suspicious, and then it quickly gains hundreds of thousands of followers. Now, the type of content Europe Invasion shares is really interesting. So on the right here, you can see AI-generated content. You can see, I don't know, a giant in a Union Jack chasing lots of visibly Muslim men away from Big Ben. Big Ben features heavily, by the way, in a lot of this content, as you might have guessed. You see on the top left, on the right-hand side, it looks like sort of a multiple Mary Poppins flying around. Again, Big Ben. I guess they're meant to be women in abayas. and so on. You get the picture. There is both this anti-Muslim trope, plus this kind of representation of British people as very Aryan, actually. I've never seen so many blonde Brits as I have until I saw these AI-generated images by Europe Invasion. But crucially, if you look on the left, you can see just examples of the content Europe Invasion shows. It's almost exclusively devoted to kind of race-baiting, xenophobic, and particularly anti-Muslim content. But it gets millions of engagements, right? So what you see here is another similar graph to the one I showed as a time series graph, this time showing a week's worth of tweets by just Europe Invasion from the time of the, just before the Southport stabbings, right? What you can see is that it got over 133 million impressions in a space of about a week. Much of that content is not only xenophobic and racist, but false. So all the tweets that I've highlighted here in yellow are false tweets, right? There was the Ali al-Shikati one, the fake name. There was the fact that the stabber of the Southport attack was a Muslim. And on the right, there was also other stories about a stabbing in Ipswich, which a number of accounts were saying was done by a Somali immigrant, which was also not true. So what you have here is an account dedicated to spreading disinformation about immigrants and Muslims, but crucially getting a hell of a lot of engagement. And this graph here is similar to the previous one, but the colors indicate the attitude towards immigrants and Muslims. As you can see, red is negative. So the majority of tweets by Europe Invasion are negative towards immigrants. Almost no positive tweets. This is just a cumulative. You just look at the top right where it says 100 million. That's 100 million, over 100 million impressions, negative impressions about Muslims, just from, again, one account within the space of a week. And here's another story, or here's a network analysis to show how there was another false story. I mentioned it before about the stabbing of a woman in Ipswich, the false news was that she was stabbed by a Somali immigrant. This was not true, but as we can see, Europe Invasion was the most influential account spreading that information. There's also Ashley Simon, who's the co-head of Britain First, and this guy called Dave Atherton, who seems to crop up a lot in these racist stories. And then there's the Musk effect, which I just want to mention briefly because I think it's interesting. We talk about these information ecosystems, and they're not, hermetically sealed from other. And I thought it was very interesting because Musk was very active during Southport, and he, in my opinion, was fanning the flames of hatred in a number of ways. But what was very interesting is that Elon Musk has interacted and has promoted accounts like Europe Invasion, which I said aren't just accounts spreading false hate speech, but they are hacked accounts suggesting that they are part of an influence operation. So you have the most followed man on Twitter, richest man in the world, actively promoting hate speech influence operations online. And just as a bit of analysis, I was curious to see how or to what extent a reply from Musk would boost another tweet. So here you have someone talking about the effects of mass migration on the UK. Musk famously replied to that tweet that civil war is inevitable. This is a new obsession of his and fits in with this theme of this kind of apocalyptic discourse, popular within right-wing circles. And a reply from Musk will boost another tweet by several 100%, right? So Musk acts to me as curator-in-chief, as a disinfluence chief. He is sort of anointing people he agrees with in order to boost their content. And so, this is just, I'll quickly end here, but this is just to sort of give a sort of bird's eye view of the general notion of the content in the week following the stabbings. If you look at the sort of diagram on the right, you can see that anti is anti-Muslim or anti-immigrant sentiment. So the amount of impressions generated for tweets that were anti-Muslim or anti-immigrant was 155 million, whereas those in defense of was only about 31. And neutral about 50 million, right? So what we can see in the immediate aftermath of the Southport stabbings, that there was disinformation about the identity of the attacker. Disinformation was that he was either an immigrant, a Muslim, an Arab, or Syrian, or had a specific name. And that this, I would argue, influenced people's perception of the identity of the killer, and then also informed the nature of the online debate to the extent that at least on X anyway, way more people were basically accusing the attacker of being a Muslim immigrant than were even defending that bit of fake information. And the fact that we saw, and this again is not clear about the causal relationship, but as Sohan mentioned, and during our investigation, we saw 6 months, 7 months of anti-Muslim disinformation and propaganda being pumped out on social media prior to Southport, prior to the elections. And it would be interesting to explore further how much this online information might have played a role in aggravating or leading to those kind of motivating people to actually to go out on the streets and to find the idea that the attacker was Muslim or an immigrant more credible. I'll leave it there for now, and I'm looking forward to everyone's questions and discussions. Thank you very much.